Hi, so today we're going to look at estimating square roots. So far we've looked at square roots that were perfect squares, like the square root of 4. Um, the square root of 4 is equal to, let me get a pen here, is equal to 2. So if I were going to put this number on a number line, I would put it right there at 2. The square root of 81 would be 9. I put it right there. The square root of 25 is 5, so it goes right there. The square root of negative 16 would be negative 4, so it would go right there. The square root of negative 25 is negative 5, so it would go right down here. The square root of 49 is 7, so it would go right there. Now, the square root of 81, not 81, 121, sorry, is 11. Now the ones I have left down here are not actually perfect squares, but they're kind of close. Like the square root of 120. Well, that's pretty close to 121, so I'm going to guess that it's about right there. Pretty close to 11, but not quite. The square root of 79. That's kind of close to the square root of 64. But it's bigger, but it's not quite as big as 81. So I know it's going to go in there somewhere, probably closer to there, closer to that 81. Square root of 55, it's bigger than 49, but it's not as close to 81 as 79. So I'm going to guess about right there. Then the negative square root of 12, somewhere in here between the 4 and the negative 16, but I'm going to guess it's about here because the negative 3 would be the negative square root of 9. And so 12 is bigger than that, but it's not quite 16 yet. So I'm going to guess it goes in there. So all of the numbers go on a number line, whether they are perfect squares or whether they're not. So we can give them a value by kind of estimating where it is, that it's kind of in between there. Now, what we want to do is be able to estimate between which two integers does the square root fall. So we don't want to have to make a number line for everything. So what we want to do though is we want to write out our squares so that we can kind of see where they go a little bit easier. So 2 is the same thing as the square root of 4. 3 is the same thing as the square root of 9. 4 is the square root of 16. 5 is the square root of 25. 6 is the square root of 36. 7 is the square root of 49. 8 is the square root of 64. And 9 is the square root of 81. Now, if you'll make yourself a chart like this, it'll make your homework a lot easier too, because you'll be able to see a little easier where these numbers go. So when I'm looking at the square root of 35, I know that's not a perfect square, but if I come over here, here's 36 and here's 25. So I know it's in between the 25 and the 36, right? So I can write down the square root of 25 is on that side of the square root of 35. And then the square root of 36 is on that side. So I know it's in between it. But it didn't ask for which square roots it was between. It said what two integers does it come between. Well, that means I just need to know what integer is equivalent to the square root of 25. And that, of course, is 5. And then the square root of 35. The square root of 36 is 6. So the square root of 35 is between 5 and 6. Now the square root of 44.8, and it doesn't really matter that that's a decimal, because since we're just estimating it between two integers, this could really be any number. So don't worry if it's a decimal. 44.8 is right here. It's between 36 and 49. So I can say this is 36 goes on this side, and on this side is the 49. And of course the square root of 36 is 6. And the square root of 49 is 7. So the square root of 44.8 is between 6 and 7. Now, they might ask you to, and sometimes we need to know just one. Like, and you can't have two. You just have to pick one. So if I want to estimate to the nearest whole number, that means they want just one number. So I'm going to do the same process. I'm going to put my 65 here, and I'm going to go back to my chart. 65 is right here between the square root of 64 and the square root of 81. So square root of 64 here, square root of 81 here. The square root of 64 is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9. So I know which two it's between, but I got to pick. I can't have both. So I'm going to come back up here and just look. 65, is that closer to 64 or is it closer to 81? Well, it's obviously closer to 64 than it is 81. So I'm going to pick 8 to be my nearest whole number. And I'm not going to worry about the 9. Okay, so let's look at the square root of 170. Now I'm going to need some bigger numbers on my chart than what are on here. So I hope you made your chart a little longer. So the number that, the square root that's going to go on this side is 169. And then the next one is 196. The square root of 169 is 13. And the square root of 196 is 14. And again, I have to pick whether I want 13 or 14. So I'm going to come back up to my original problem here and decide which is closer to 170. Is 196 closer to 170 or is 169? Well, I'm going to say 169 there is closer, right? So I'm going to pick 13 as my integer that is, or my whole number that's closest to my square root, 13.